Now guys, today's driver comparison video might be the most difficult comparison video I have ever made, because it's going to be so hard to decide who is better out of Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher, two drivers who are very, very equally matched in terms of their careers and their skills. So somehow in today's video, I'm going to try and decide who is better out of Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher, and also analyse, can Lewis Hamilton emulate Michael Schumacher's records? So if you want to join in the conversation as to who is better out of these two legends of Formula 1, then make sure to check out this video. Now first, as we normally do in the driver comparison videos, let's look at the tail of the tape. So for Michael Schumacher, he had 91 race wins, 68 pole positions. He completed over 300 races and of course won 7 world titles. Lewis Hamilton, though, so far has won 5 world championships. He has 87 pole positions and 82 race wins, and also has those wins and poles and titles in less races. Make of that what you will. But now let's really get into this comparison, and first off, look at the pace comparison between the two when it comes to qualifying, the races, and in the wet. Now first, when it comes to qualifying, I'd have to give it to Lewis Hamilton because he has more pole positions than Michael Schumacher ever had, and also Lewis has done that in less races. And if you look at where Michael Schumacher was at his absolute best, it was not qualifying. Michael was very strong when it came to qualifying, but was always stronger in the races. And you cannot doubt that Lewis Hamilton is at least one of the greatest qualifying drivers there has ever been. I'm not sure he's quite at Ayrton Senna's level quite yet, but he is so strong when it comes to speed over a single lap. But when it comes to pace during a Sunday in the Grand Prix, I would actually give that to Michael Schumacher, because there were so many races in Michael's career where even if his qualifying position was not that great, he would somehow come back from that poor grid position, come through and still finish on the podium, if not win the race. One great example of that is the 1998 Hungarian Grand Prix, where he somehow beat the two McLarens of Mika Häkkinen and David Coulthard in a weekend where the Ferrari was nowhere near the McLaren in terms of speed. But thanks to a brilliant pit strategy by Ferrari and brilliant pace by Michael Schumacher, he won the race. Now, I'm not saying Lewis Hamilton is not good when it comes to race pace, but compared to Michael Schumacher's race pace, it's not as good in my opinion. Of course, Lewis did have a similar race to that Hungary 98 performance by Michael Schumacher in Hungary in 2019. But I don't think it was quite as good, because I think the competition that Michael had in that particular race was a bit stronger than Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. And finally, when it comes to pace in the wet, it's very hard to decide who is the better driver when it comes to this, because both drivers are so supreme in wet conditions, but I'm going to have to give it to Michael Schumacher. The reason I'm going to give it to Michael Schumacher is because he had more performances in the wet that were more dominant and impressive than Lewis has had. Again, Lewis is so special when it comes to pace in the wet or changeable conditions. No doubt about it whatsoever. Look at Silverstone 2008, where he almost lapped the entire field. Great performance, I'm not denying that. But again, Michael's were just that bit better. For example, the 96 Spanish Grand Prix, where in a car that was not really that competitive at the time, he completely rinsed the field. And also there were 2 races in Monaco and Spa in 1997 where he did something that has rarely been done, not only in Formula 1 history, but in motorsport history. Once he was in the lead of those races, towards the start of those races, he was not pulling away at half a second a lap or a second a lap. He was pulling away at many seconds a lap. I'm talking 4, 5, 6 seconds a lap in the first few laps of those races. When have you ever seen or heard of such a thing? Well, that's just how great Michael Schumacher was in the wet. So for me, because Michael has more impressive performances in the wet, I'd have to give it just about to Michael Schumacher. But now let's get into the racing comparison when it comes to overtaking and defending. Now, when it comes to overtaking, I'm going to give this to Lewis Hamilton because I think Lewis Hamilton has in his career so far compared to what Michael showed in his career, Lewis has shown more skill when it comes to overtaking. Michael is definitely a great racer, but Lewis has had plenty of races where he's had to battle his way to getting a race victory. Michael has not had that as much. There has been plenty of races that Michael won in his 91 race wins where he has just been dominating from the front of the field. And some of the time when Michael had to come through the field, he wasn't quite as clean or as great as Lewis Hamilton could be. And the key reason for me why Lewis Hamilton is just about better in this area is because no matter where you put your car in defending against Lewis Hamilton, somehow, some way, he will overtake you because he has such supreme confidence to pass you in any area of the track. But when it comes to defending your position from massive pressure, I'd have to give it to Michael Schumacher because if you look at Michael's career, it was very rare that Michael was easily passed on the track. If you were going to pass Michael Schumacher, it would have to be a move that would go down as one of the best overtakes of all time, such as when Mika Häkkinen passed Michael Schumacher at Spa in 2000. That was how great Michael Schumacher was when it came to defending his position, that you had to pull off probably the greatest overtake of your entire career to pass him. And yes, sometimes Michael did cross the line when it came to how to defend his position, but still, him getting overtook on track was a very, very rare sight. The same goes for Lewis Hamilton, but I don't think in Lewis's career so far, we have quite seen Lewis being as hard to pass as Michael was. I do understand that, of course, in Lewis's era, we have had plenty of years where we've had DRS, and that does make it, of course, for a car ahead, harder to defend from a car behind. But still, I don't think we've seen Lewis be as hard to pass as Michael Schumacher was in Michael's first career. And by the way, just to clarify now that we're about midway through this video, when we're talking up Michael Schumacher, please remember that I'm talking up Michael Schumacher the first career, not Michael's second career when he came to Mercedes, because that wasn't the Michael Schumacher we all know and love. And I think it was pretty clear to see in 2010, 2011 and 2012 that Michael was not the same driver. And when it comes to the mental aspect of racing, I think both Michael and Lewis are basically equal. Again, both drivers are able to withstand a lot of pressure. They can also apply a lot of pressure and make their way through by applying that pressure. And both of these drivers had one skill that's very important to have in Formula 1, which is when they smelt blood or smelt an overtake coming, they would go and get it. The only areas where I think both drivers can be a bit weaker in is, say, the over-emotional point of view. Michael, I think, at times did get very over-emotional in terms of defending his position and racing, and that did lead to controversies and contacts. Lewis, of course, hasn't had as many controversies and contacts, but when it comes to getting over-emotional behind the wheel, I think they are both very similar. Whenever both drivers got in a racing car, they raced their heart out. And that's what made Michael Schumacher back in his day and Lewis Hamilton right now such fiery competitive monsters. But now we've done a comparison head to head when it came to driving and mentality. Let's now, for a change, look at a comparison of their respective careers. Now, of course, Michael Schumacher's first career was about 14 years long. His career, of course, started at Benetton, where in the first couple of years he was starting to, get to know the team and starting to develop with the team as the team grew towards a world championship level. And by the time we got to 94 and 95 and new regulations in Formula 1, Michael and Benetton started winning world titles. And even though Michael's Benetton was not the most legal at times, Michael was very dominant in those 2 years. And without a doubt, 1995 was definitely the most impressive season, where in that season the car was not quite as good as the Williams he was racing against for the World Championship, but still, he came out on top. But then, of course, in 1996, he joined Ferrari and took a risk going to Ferrari, a team that had not won a world championship in a very, very long time. And those first few years at Ferrari were very tough as he had to try and develop the car to become good enough to win a world championship, and also they had many heartbreaks together, such as Jerez 97, even though that was caused by Michael himself, Suzuka 98, Silverstone 99, where of course he got injured. Those first few years, even though there was plenty of race wins and they were very competitive for the world championship, mostly because Michael Schumacher put Ferrari in that position, it was a very difficult first 2 or 3 years with him at Ferrari. But of course, once we got to 2000, he won his first world championship at Ferrari, and after that, the rest is history. He won 5 in a row and completely dominated Formula 1 for the early to mid 2000s, and put Ferrari back into the position of being the greatest team in Formula 1, and ended up with the most race wins, of course, by the end of his first career, 91 race wins and 7 world championships. But Lewis Hamilton's career also has been very good in only 12 years. Of course, when he first came to Formula 1 in 2007 with McLaren, straight away he was contending for a world title, and was also very unfortunate not to win it at the end, but immediately showed how great of a driver Lewis could be by straight away taking on, at the time, the best drivers in Formula 1, Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen, and many times he came out on top. Then of course the next year in 2008 he won his first world championship, a season that was not quite as good as 2007 but was still a good year. Then after that at McLaren things became difficult as McLaren were not providing cars that were good enough for Lewis Hamilton to go for a world championship. Of course 2009 the McLaren was basically a midfield car. In 2010 Lewis did well to contend even though the car was very slow. Very slow, I mean, compared to Red Bull, who were so much quicker. And that was the case also in 2011, but in 2012, McLaren finally produced a car that was good enough for Lewis Hamilton to go for his second world title, but McLaren let him down. And that's why Lewis left McLaren at the end of 2012. And in a very similar way to Michael Schumacher, he took a risk and went to a team who the previous season in 2012 were not as good at all compared to McLaren. But after a couple years, the move made complete sense as Mercedes were now beginning their dominance of Formula 1. With Lewis between 2014 and 2018 winning 4 of the 5 world titles on offer and basically dominating the last 5 years of Formula 1. And of course in 2019 is heading towards his 6th World Championship. Now, if you look at their careers, I would have to say that Lewis Hamilton has probably had a more impressive career because he's done things similar to Michael Schumacher but in less time. And also I do believe that Lewis Hamilton's competition between 2007 to 2019 compared to Michael's competition between 92 and 2006, I think Lewis's competition was a bit stronger. Michael's, of course, had plenty of great drivers, but some of them were not quite at Michael's level. When Lewis has had to race against drivers that were world champions. Michael didn't have to race against that many people who won the world title before. And if we look at the comparisons between driving, mentality, and their careers, I think Lewis Hamilton is slightly the better driver, and I think has had a more impressive career. Yep, I've said it, I think Lewis Hamilton is better than Michael Schumacher. But that doesn't mean Lewis, in my opinion, is the best of all time, because I don't think Michael is the greatest of all time. For me, Ayrton Senna is the greatest driver of all time. And if Lewis Hamilton can, of course, go on and win his 6th world title, which he will do in a couple races' time, but if he also goes on to win his 7th world championship in a very similar fashion next year in 2020, then in my opinion, controversial as it may sound, Lewis Hamilton will be the GOAT, the greatest of all time. But in terms of records and being the greatest of all time when it comes to the stats, can he emulate Michael Schumacher? Well, when it comes to race victories, he will do that because he's only 9 victories behind, and Lewis has at least 2 or 3 more years left, and he already has more pole positions and is not that far away when it comes to world championships, considering the dominant team he is a part of. And if I was to predict right now when Lewis would become statistically the greatest of all time, it's probably going to be 2021 or 2022. I'd say 2022 to be safe. But without a doubt, Lewis Hamilton at the moment is heading towards being the greatest of all time and heading towards being statistically the greatest of all time. I know some people watching this video will be doubters of Lewis Hamilton, and I understand your points, but you cannot deny the greatness that Lewis has shown in only 12 years of racing. But guys, let me know in the comments section down below, who is the better driver, Lewis Hamilton or Michael Schumacher? Do you also think Lewis can emulate Michael's records in terms of the world titles and race victories? And do you think right now Lewis Hamilton is the GOAT, or do you think he will become the GOAT in a few years' time? Let me know in the comments section down below. And also don't forget to subscribe for more content like this and hit the like button down below for more content like this as well. But guys, until my next video coming up this time tomorrow, the preview for the 2019 Japanese Grand Prix, it has been me, Hazza HD. Goodbye.